The unexpected roommate. The military ship Titan's Wrath moved through the dark space, its engines humming like a sleeping beast. Inside, soldiers and officers walked with purpose, their boots echoing in the metal hallways. Among them was Ethan Cole, a human guard assigned to a special mission. Ethan had been in the military for years, facing pirates, rogue AI, and dangerous aliens, but nothing could prepare him for his new assignment. He stood in the command center, facing his superior officer, Captain Reynolds. "You want me to do what?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "You heard me, Sergeant," Captain Reynolds replied, arms crossed. "You'll be guarding Princess Skilara for the duration of this diplomatic mission." Ethan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. A princess. Seriously, he had expected something more action-packed, like hunting down rebels or leading an assault team. Babysitting a royal was the last thing he wanted. "Understood, sir," Ethan finally said. "Where's her security team?" Captain Reynolds sighed. "Due to political reasons, only a few of her people are allowed on this ship. We can't risk hostilities between our two species. You're the only one assigned to her personal protection." That was bad enough, but the next part made things worse. "One more thing," Reynolds added. "Due to space constraints, you'll be sharing a room with her." Ethan's eyes widened. "What? A single room? With an alien princess?" "Those are your orders, Sergeant." Dismissed. Ethan stood in front of his new quarters, staring at the metallic door. He took a deep breath, then pressed the button to enter. Inside, the room was small, with a desk, a closet, and only one bed. His stomach sank. Then he saw her. Princess Skilara. She stood near the bed, her tall figure radiating elegance and authority. Her smooth violet skin shimmered slightly under the artificial lights. Her silver eyes locked onto Ethan with clear disapproval. "You must be the human guard." Her voice was calm, but filled with irritation. Ethan kept his expression neutral. "Sergeant Ethan Cole, assigned to your protection, Princess." Skilara crossed her arms. "They did not tell me I would be forced to share my living space with a human. Trust me, Princess, I wasn't expecting this either." She glanced at the single bed behind them. "This is unacceptable. In Valerian culture, sharing a sleeping space with an unrelated male is dishonorable." Ethan smirked. "Well, in human culture, we call it bad luck." Skilara's silver eyes narrowed. "I will speak to the captain. There must be another solution." "Go ahead," Ethan said, shrugging. "But this ship is packed. There's nowhere else to put us." Skilara lifted her chin. "Then I will sleep on the floor." Ethan laughed. "No offense, Princess, but I don't see royalty sleeping on a cold metal floor." She gave him an icy glare. "And I do not see myself sharing a bed with a human." Ethan sighed. "Look, I'll take the floor." "All right." Problem solved. Skilara hesitated. "Why would you do that?" Ethan shrugged. "Because I don't want you complaining every second of the trip. And because I don't mind." For a moment, she studied him. Then, without another word, she sat on the edge of the bed. Ethan grabbed a spare blanket from the storage unit and dropped it on the floor. He lay down, using his arm as a pillow. The metal floor was hard and cold, but he had slept in worse places. The room fell into silence. Then, BZZT. A red light flashed on the control panel near the door. Skilara sat up. What was that? Ethan stood quickly. Some kind of security alert. He walked over to the panel and tapped the screen. A warning message flashed in red text. System ERROR. Unauthorized access DKTCTED. Skilara's face darkened. This ship should be secure. Who would attempt unauthorized access? Ethan checked his communicator. No alerts from the bridge. No alarms. Something didn't feel right. "Stay here," Ethan ordered. "Lock the door behind me." Skilara scoffed. I do not take orders from you, human. I'm not asking. Princess, Ethan said, his voice firm. If something's wrong, I need to make sure you're safe. Silara hesitated, but then slowly she nodded. Fine, but be careful. Ethan stepped into the hallway, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. The lights flickered. In the distance, he heard footsteps, but the sound was wrong. Too fast, too heavy. A shiver ran down his spine. Something was on board the ship, and it wasn't supposed to be here. Clashing cultures and rising tension. The hallway outside their shared room was eerily quiet. Ethan Cole stood still, ears sharp, scanning the dimly lit corridor. The flickering lights cast strange shadows against the steel walls, making it feel like something, or someone, was watching him. His grip tightened on his sidearm, a standard-issue plasma pistol. His instincts screamed that something was off. He took a cautious step forward, his military training kicking in. Then, thud. A sound echoed down the hall, deep and unnatural. Ethan turned sharply, weapon raised. His heartbeat was steady, but his mind was racing. Was it just a malfunction in the ship, or was there really an intruder on board? Sergeant Cole. Silara's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Ethan turned to see the alien princess standing in the doorway, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the low light. She had changed into something more comfortable, an elegant but simple Valerian sleep robe, though her posture was as rigid as ever. I told you to stay inside, Ethan hissed. Silara lifted her chin. I do not take orders from humans. Ethan groaned inwardly. Yeah, I get it. But if there's a threat on this ship, you're making my job harder. Silara stepped forward, unbothered by his frustration. Valerians do not hide from danger. If there is a threat, I must assess it myself. Ethan resisted the urge to rub his temples. Of course, a stubborn, royal warrior princess. Just my luck. Before he could argue, the sound came again. Thud. This time, it was closer. Silara's expression shifted from irritation to something resembling wariness. For the first time, Ethan saw her guard falter, just a little. Get back inside, he ordered again, this time more firmly. Silara hesitated, her pride fighting against her instincts. But then, bzzzt, the hallway lights cut out completely. A thick darkness swallowed everything. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, a metallic clatter from further down the corridor. Ethan immediately pressed himself against the wall, motioning for Silara to do the same. Surprisingly, she followed without argument. Someone is here, Silara whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan nodded. He activated his helmet visor, which switched to low-light vision. The hallway was now visible in a ghostly green hue. His breath hitched. Further down the hall, a figure moved, but not like a normal human. It was tall, armored, and fast. The way it skittered across the floor sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. Not human, not Valerian, and it was coming straight for them. A clash of two worlds. Ethan didn't wait. Run, he barked, grabbing Silara's wrist and pulling her back toward their room. Silara let out a sharp breath but followed his lead. Ethan punched the door panel, forcing it to close behind them. The second it sealed shut, he turned to Silara. That wasn't one of your people, was it? He demanded. She shook her head, her silver eyes flickering with an unreadable emotion. No, and it was not human either. Ethan exhaled. Fantastic. Silara folded her arms. If you had let me examine it, we might have identified the species. Ethan scoffed. Oh sure, let's just walk up to the potential assassin and ask for its identification. Silara shot him a glare. Sarcasm is unnecessary. Ethan ran a hand through his short brown hair. All right, princess, what do you know? Could this be an enemy of your people? She hesitated. Valeria has many enemies, but none who would attempt something so reckless aboard a human military vessel. Ethan didn't like that answer. It meant there were too many possibilities. Silara took a step forward. If you wish to protect me, you must trust my judgment, human. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Trust? You don't even trust me enough to share a room without acting like I'm some sort of barbarian. Silara's expression darkened. That is because you are a barbarian. Ethan threw his hands up. Unbelievable. Silara remained calm. Humans lack discipline. You act impulsively, rely on violence, and have no concept of personal space. Ethan gave a humorless laugh. Oh, I'm sorry, princess. I didn't realize personal space included letting an assassin cut your throat in the hallway. Silara tilted her head. You are defensive. Did my words offend you? Ethan let out a breath, forcing himself to relax. No, I'm just tired. And I don't enjoy arguing when there's an unknown threat hunting us. Silara studied him for a moment, then did something unexpected. She nodded. Very well. We will work together. For now. Ethan blinked. Did you just agree with me? Silara sighed. Do not make me regret it. Before Ethan could reply, a loud bang hit their door. Both of them turned, instincts sharp. Something was trying to break in. Ethan raised his pistol, stepping in front of Silara automatically. She glanced at him in surprise. What are you doing? My job, Ethan muttered. Stay behind me. Another bang. Then another. The door started to dent inward. Silara clenched her fists. If it gets in, we fight together. Ethan smirked despite the situation. Oh, now you want to work together. She glared at him. Not the time for jokes, human. Ethan turned back to the door. All right, princess. Let's show this thing why messing with us was a mistake. The next bang came, and the door burst open. A shadow loomed in the doorway. And the fight began. An unknown threat on the ship. The door breaks open. The metal doorframe twisted inward, screeching as it bent under some immense force. Ethan Cole didn't waste time. He pulled Silara behind him, raising his plasma pistol at the dark silhouette in the doorway. The emergency lights flickered, barely illuminating the creature that now stepped inside. It was tall, at least 7 feet, covered in dark metallic armor, its limbs jointed at strange angles. Its eyes glowed a faint, eerie blue, and its clawed fingers twitched, as if testing the air for movement. Ethan's instincts screamed. This thing is not friendly. The creature lunged. Ethan fired 2 rapid plasma shots, both hitting the target, but the creature barely flinched. Instead, it moved unnaturally fast, dodging the next blast with an agility no armored being should have. Move, Ethan shouted, pushing Silara aside just as the creature swung a razor-sharp claw at them. The impact smashed into the metal wall, denting it like thin aluminum. That would have taken my head clean off, Ethan thought grimly. The first fight. Silara didn't hesitate. In one smooth motion, she activated a small energy blade from her wrist, a Valerian plasma dagger. The blade hummed with blue energy, casting a faint glow on her violet skin. I will not cower behind you, human, she snapped, eyes locked onto the attacker. Not the time for pride, princess, Ethan retorted, dodging another swipe and firing 2 more shots. One of them hit the creature's shoulder joint, and this time it reacted, jerking slightly before letting out a low guttural growl. It feels pain. Good. Silara suddenly darted forward, faster than Ethan expected. Her dagger slashed in a precise arc, cutting across the creature's arm plating. Sparks flew, and the thing staggered back. Nice hit, Ethan said, taking the opportunity to fire a shot into its leg joint. This time, the blast did more than just make the creature recoil. It collapsed onto one knee, its movement temporarily slowed. For a split second, Ethan met Silara's gaze. She looked just as surprised as he did. They had just fought together, and won. But the moment didn't last. The creature let out a deep mechanical shriek, and before either of them could react, it activated something on its armor. A blinding flash of blue light erupted, forcing Ethan and Silara to shield their eyes. By the time their vision cleared, the creature was gone. Damn it, Ethan cursed, scanning the room. It escaped. Silara gritted her teeth. It retreated because it knew we were too much for it. Ethan wasn't so sure. If it left, it meant it had a reason to retreat, maybe to regroup, maybe to call for reinforcements. Either way, it wasn't over yet. The bigger problem. Ethan turned to Silara. What the hell was that thing? She hesitated. Then, with an expression more serious than before, she said, I don't know. But I intend to find out. Ethan frowned. You sure it wasn't one of your enemies? Silara's silver eyes flickered with something unreadable. No known species fights like that. No armor I have encountered moves that fast. And those eyes. She trailed off. Ethan folded his arms. So we're dealing with something neither of us has seen before. Great. Then his comlink beeped. Sergeant Cole, this is Captain Reynolds. What's your status? Ethan tapped his communicator. Captain, we have an intruder on board. Non-human, non-Valerian, heavily armored and extremely fast. It attacked our quarters. There was a brief silence before Reynolds spoke again. You're not the only ones. We have multiple reports of unidentified hostiles on different decks. Ethan's stomach tightened. There were more of them. The ship under attack. How many? Ethan asked. At least 5, maybe more, Reynolds replied. They're moving through the ship, disabling security systems. We don't know what they're after yet, but they're dangerous. Silara stepped forward. Captain Reynolds, this ship is carrying high-level diplomatic data. If they gain access to it, they could sabotage the peace treaty between our species. There was a brief silence. Then Reynolds said, Understood, Princess. Sergeant Cole, get her to the secured area in the command deck. We'll regroup there. Ethan sighed. Copy that. We're on our way. As the transmission ended, Ethan turned to Silara. Looks like we're heading to the command deck. She nodded but crossed her arms. Very well, but I do not require your protection. Ethan gave her a look. Oh, really? Because 5 minutes ago, you were about to get torn apart. Silara's eyes narrowed. I had the situation under control. Ethan smirked. Yeah, sure. Whatever you say, Princess. She huffed but didn't argue further. An uneasy alliance. As they moved through the hallways, Ethan kept his pistol raised, checking every corner before moving forward. Silara moved with an eerie grace, her dagger at the ready, her movements silent. Despite their differences, they were starting to work in sync. But something about the way she had reacted to the creature bothered Ethan. She had been surprised, too surprised, almost like she had expected something else. What aren't you telling me? As they reached an intersection, Ethan suddenly stopped and turned to her. All right, spill it. You're hiding something. Silara stiffened. What do you mean? Ethan narrowed his eyes. You looked like you recognized it, or at least like you were expecting something different. For a second, she didn't answer. Then she exhaled. It is not that I recognized it, she admitted slowly. It is that I recognize its movements. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated again. Then, because they fight like us. Ethan's breath caught. What? Silara continued, her voice quieter now. I have trained against thousands of warriors, studied countless battle styles. That creature, it moved like a trained Valerian fighter. Ethan felt a cold realization settle in his gut. Something was very, very wrong. Before he could say anything, an emergency siren blared through the ship. Warning. CQRAT BDREHH in main data core. All PRSON and ELREPRT to emergency stations. Silara's expression darkened. They are going for the treaty data. Ethan cocked his pistol. Then we better stop them. Together, They took off running toward the command deck. Neither of them knew what they were about to uncover. Forced to trust each other. Running through the fire, Ethan and Silara sprinted down the dimly lit corridors of the Titan's wrath, their boots pounding against the metal floor. Emergency alarms blared across the ship, casting the hallways in an eerie red glow. "How far to the command deck?" Silara asked, keeping pace with Ethan despite his military-trained speed. Ethan glanced at his wrist-mounted holomap. 5 decks up. If we take the emergency lift at section C12, we can get there in minutes. And if the intruders have already reached it? Ethan didn't answer. They both knew the answer was bad. As they turned a corner, Ethan held up a fist, a silent signal to stop. Silara instantly flattened herself against the wall beside him, her silver eyes scanning ahead. A group of 3 enemy soldiers were gathered near an open security terminal, their strange biomechanical armor pulsing with an unnatural blue energy. They weren't just any intruders. They were the same species as the one that attacked their quarters. "They're trying to override the security lockdown," Ethan whispered. Silara narrowed her eyes. "We need to stop them." Ethan nodded. "I count 3. You take left. I'll take right. We strike on my signal." Silara gave him a look. "I am not one of your human soldiers, Cole." Ethan smirked. "Then think of it as a strategy suggestion." She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Ethan crouched lower, silently activating his cloaking module, a short-term invisibility field standard in military armor. Silara, on the other hand, moved like a shadow, almost as if her body naturally blended with the dim lighting. They were 2 completely different warriors, but in this moment, they'd worked as one. The silent kill. The first enemy never saw Ethan coming. In one swift motion, he wrapped an arm around its throat, pressing his plasma pistol against the weak point in its armor, and fired point blank. A blue energy fizzled as the creature collapsed without a sound. At the exact same moment, Silara sliced through the second enemy's throat, her plasma dagger searing through its armor like butter. The third soldier had just enough time to react, turning with a guttural snarl, only to be met with a simultaneous attack from both Ethan and Silara. 1 shot, 1 stab. The last enemy hit the floor. Ethan exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Well, that went well. Silara wiped her blade clean, looking unimpressed. Sloppy. Ethan smirked. "You're welcome, princess." Silara didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, she knelt beside one of the bodies, her fingers running over the armor plating. "This design," she murmured. "It's familiar." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Familiar how?" She hesitated. "The way it is structured. It is similar to a lost Valerian technology, a project that was abandoned centuries ago." Ethan's expression hardened. "So they might not just be random attackers. They might be connected to your people." Silara met his gaze. "That is what I fear." The truth about the intruders. Before they could discuss further, Ethan's communicator crackled to life. "Sergeant Cole, this is Captain Reynolds. We have a problem." "Yeah, Captain, I got that part already," Ethan replied. "What's going on?" There was a brief silence. Then, "They're not here for the treaty data." Ethan's stomach twisted. "What?" "Our security logs show they're after something else, something in the lower storage bay." Ethan and Silara exchanged a look. "What's in the lower storage bay, Captain?" Silara asked. Reynolds hesitated. "A classified cargo, one that Valeria specifically requested we transport." Ethan turned to Silara. "You wouldn't happen to know what's inside that cargo, would you?" Silara's expression darkened. "I might." "You might," Ethan repeated, crossing his arms. "Princess, now's not the time for secrets." Silara's jaw clenched. "It is a prototype, a forbidden creation from Valerian research." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Let me guess, a bioweapon." Silara looked away. "Not exactly. But if they are after it, then it means they know its value. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling up. Perfect. So we're not just dealing with assassins. We're dealing with thieves trying to steal alien supertech. Before Silara could respond, the ship suddenly shook violently. A deep metallic boom echoed through the corridors. The emergency lights flickered as warning sirens blared louder. Then, the ship's AI spoke over the intercom. Warning. Unauthorized breach detected in lower storage bay. Security systems failing. Intruders advancing toward Vault 7. Silara's face hardened. They are close. Ethan sighed, checking his ammo. Well then, Princess. Looks like we're taking a detour. She gave him a sharp nod. Let us finish this. Together, they turned and sprinted toward the lower decks, toward the real battle ahead. The hidden enemy revealed. Rushing into the fire, Ethan and Silara raced through the narrow corridors of the Titan's wrath, their footsteps echoing against the metallic floor. The ship's emergency sirens blared, casting the hallways in a deep crimson glow. The deeper they went, the more the air itself felt wrong. There was something about this whole situation, about these intruders, that didn't sit right with Ethan. They weren't just here for a political assassination, nor were they simple pirates looking for valuable cargo. They were after something specific, and that something was locked inside Vault 7. How much further? Silara asked, her voice steady despite the intensity of their sprint. Ethan checked his holomap. 2 more corridors, then down an emergency lift. After that, we're at the storage bay. Suddenly, boom! A violent explosion rocked the ship, nearly throwing Ethan off balance. The lights flickered, and from deeper within the ship, a roar of metal tearing apart sent a shiver down his spine. They just blew open the vault, Ethan realized. Silara gritted her teeth. Then we are already behind. Ethan clicked his weapon's safety off. Not for long. The battle in the storage bay. The storage bay was a massive industrial space lined with towering metal crates, robotic loaders, and sealed cargo containers. The air smelled of burned wiring and plasma discharge, clear signs that a firefight had just taken place. As Ethan and Silara arrived, they immediately took cover behind a supply crate, assessing the situation. At least 7 intruders were spread across the bay. Some stood near Vault 7, its massive reinforced doors now hanging open, smoke pouring from the blast marks. Others were covering the perimeter, their weapons raised as they secured the area. And in the center of it all, a commanding figure, taller than the rest, wearing heavily reinforced armor. Unlike the other attackers, his armor had royal engravings, something uniquely Valerian. Silara inhaled sharply. No, it cannot be. Ethan glanced at her. What? You recognize that guy? Her expression darkened. His name is Commander Varkos. He was once one of Valeria's greatest warriors. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Was. Silara's hands clenched into fists. He was declared dead over a decade ago. Ethan exhaled. Well, someone forgot to tell him that. An enemy thought dead. They didn't have time to process the revelation. One of the intruders suddenly turned their way, spotted them. Over there, the soldier shouted, raising his weapon. Move, Ethan barked, pulling Silara down just as plasma bolts ripped through the air where their heads had been. The room erupted into chaos. Ethan rolled into a crouch and returned fire, hitting one enemy in the chest, sending them crashing to the floor. Silara darted forward with lightning-fast speed, using the stacked crates for cover, before leaping onto a soldier and driving her plasma dagger into his throat. Varkos watched, unfazed, as his men started to fall. Then, with a calm but bone-chilling voice, he finally spoke. Ah, Princess Silara, how fitting that you would come to witness my return. Silara glared at him. You should be dead. Varkos chuckled. And yet here I stand, very much alive, more than I can say for you if you do not leave now. Ethan fired at him, but The plasma shot hit his armor and barely left a dent. Varkos turned his head toward Ethan. "And you must be the human protector." "How?" "Disappointing." Ethan scowled. "You talk too much." He moved to fire again, but before he could, Varkos raised his hand, and suddenly Ethan felt a strange, invisible force slam into him, a terrible new power. It was like a gravitational wave smashed into his chest. Ethan was lifted off his feet and thrown backward, crashing into a metal crate with enough force to leave a dent. Pain exploded through his ribs, but he forced himself to stay conscious. "What the hell was that?" He coughed. Silara's face paled. "Impossible." Varkos smiled, stepping forward. "Oh, princess, have you truly been left so blind by your father's lies?" Then, as if proving a point, Varkos raised his arm, and his armor shifted, revealing what looked like organic plating fused with technology. Ethan's mind reeled. This wasn't just armor. It was alive. The truth about the experiment. Silara's eyes narrowed. That armor, it was never meant to exist. Varkos laughed. "Oh, but it does. And now, it belongs to me." Ethan forced himself to his feet, clutching his side. "Someone want to tell me what the hell is going on?" Silara didn't take her eyes off Varkos. That armor is part of a forbidden Valerian project, an experiment designed to create the ultimate warrior by fusing technology with living organisms. Ethan's breath caught. A biotech suit, like a parasite. Varkos smirked. An evolution. Ethan shook his head. "And let me guess, the project was shut down because it was too dangerous." Silara's voice was barely a whisper. "It was shut down because the subjects lost their minds." Varkos grinned. "Not lost, dear princess. Awakened." He clenched his fist, and the air itself seemed to ripple. Ethan knew one thing. This fight was far from over. The final stand begins. Varkos turned to his remaining soldiers. "Take the artifact. Kill anyone who resists." 2 soldiers grabbed a mysterious, glowing containment unit from inside Vault 7. Whatever was inside pulsed with an unnatural energy, something that made even Silara flinch. "We can't let them leave with that," Ethan muttered. Silara nodded. "Then we make our stand here." Varkos sighed. "You are outnumbered and outmatched. Surrender, and perhaps I will spare your lives." Ethan smirked. "Yeah, see, I don't do the whole surrender thing." He cocked his pistol. Silara readied her dagger, and together they prepared for the fight of their lives. The final fight and escape. The battle begins. The air inside the storage bay crackled with tension as Ethan and Silara stood their ground against Commander Varkos and his soldiers. The hum of plasma weapons, the distant echoes of alarms, and the heavy footsteps of armored intruders filled the chamber with an eerie anticipation. Ethan tightened his grip on his pistol, stealing a glance at the container holding the Valerian artifact. It pulsed with a strange, rhythmic glow, like something inside was alive. Silara stood beside him, her plasma dagger humming softly. Her stance was firm, but Ethan could sense the unspoken turmoil inside her. This wasn't just another battle for her. This was personal. Varkos smirked, stepping forward. His bio-enhanced armor rippled, shifting like a living creature bonded to his body. "Your defiance is admirable, but foolish," he mused, his voice a deep, unnatural resonance. "You are outnumbered, outmatched. I offer you one last chance. Stand down, and I may let you live." Ethan exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "Yeah, see, I have this bad habit of not listening to people who try to kill me." Silara's voice was calm but deadly. "And I do not negotiate with traitors." Varkos sighed. "So be it." Then he raised his hand, and the world exploded into chaos, an impossible enemy. The first attack came fast. Varkos swiped his arm through the air, and an invisible force surged forward, slamming into Ethan and Silara like a shockwave. Ethan was hurled backward, his spine smashing into a metal crate. Stars burst behind his eyes as pain flared up his ribs. Silara, faster and more agile, twisted midair, landing gracefully on her feet. Without hesitation, she lunged toward Varkos, her dagger flashing. Varkos moved unnaturally fast, catching her wrist mid-strike. His grip tightened, and a wave of bioenergy surged through his armor, sending an electric-like jolt through Silara's body. She cried out, her dagger falling from her grip. Ethan forced himself up, ignoring the pain. Get away from her. He fired 3 plasma shots directly at Varkos' head. The blasts hit his armor, but instead of burning through, the energy was absorbed. Oh, come on, Ethan growled. Varkos turned his gaze toward him. Your primitive weapons cannot harm me, human. Yeah. Ethan fired another shot, but this time, at the ceiling. A heavy supply crate, weakened by previous battle damage, collapsed directly toward Varkos. Even with his enhanced speed, he wasn't fast enough. The massive crate slammed down on him, pinning him underneath. No time to celebrate. Silara stumbled back, breathing hard. That was reckless. Ethan grinned. Reckless works. But their victory was short-lived. The remaining enemy soldiers had regrouped, their weapons aimed at them. And worse, the artifact container was already being carried toward the exit. They're getting away. Silara hissed. Ethan's mind raced. They couldn't fight everyone at once. They needed another way. Then he saw it, the emergency containment field controls on the far side of the room. If he could activate it, he could seal off the exit before the intruders escaped. But he had to move now. Splitting up, Ethan turned to Silara. I'll cut off their escape. You get to the artifact. She hesitated. You cannot face them alone. Ethan smirked. I don't have to. I just have to buy us time. Silara locked eyes with him, just for a second, then nodded. Do not get yourself killed, human. No promises. As Silara sprinted toward the enemy carrying the artifact, Ethan broke into a dead run toward the control panel. Plasma bolts whizzed past him, but he zigzagged through the crates, dodging fire as best he could. His heart pounded as he slid to a stop in front of the console. Come on, he muttered, his fingers flying across the touchscreen. A bright red warning flashed on the screen. XHTAGAKCONTENT field. Ethan didn't hesitate. He slammed the confirmation button. The tables turned. A sudden energy surge filled the room as blue containment barriers slammed down across the exits. The intruders froze as the realization hit them. They were trapped. Ethan grinned. Not so fast, boys. On the other side of the bay, Silara had caught up to the artifact transporters. In a blur of motion, she disarmed one with a quick, brutal strike, then slashed through another's armor, sending him collapsing to the floor. But then, Varkos roared. The supply crate trapping him exploded outward, metal shards flying in every direction. His armor crackled with raw energy, his eyes burning with rage. Enough. With a flick of his hand, he sent out another shockwave, this one more powerful than before. The force slammed into Ethan, throwing him backward into the wall. His vision blurred from the impact. Silara was caught midair, crashing hard against the floor. Varkos strode forward, his presence looming over them like a storm. You will not stop me. The desperate gamble. Ethan struggled to stand. His whole body ached, but he wasn't out of tricks yet. He reached into his utility belt and pulled out his last resort, an EMP grenade. Varkos saw the movement and smirked. That will not stop me, human. Ethan smirked back, wasn't aiming for you. Then he threw the grenade directly at the artifact container. A sudden explosion. The EMP grenade detonated midair, sending a shockwave of disruption through the artifact's containment field. The energy inside reacted violently, glowing brighter, pulsing erratically, until Boom! A massive shockwave of pure energy erupted from the artifact, engulfing everything. Ethan was blinded by the explosion. He felt the air itself twist and distort, like reality was tearing apart. For a moment, he thought he was dead. Then, the world snapped back into place. The aftermath. Ethan groaned, opening his eyes. The storage bay was in ruins. Sparks flew from broken panels, and several of Varkos' soldiers were unconscious or dead. Silara coughed, pushing herself up. And Varkos was gone. Ethan blinked. Did we just win? Silara stared at the spot where Varkos had stood, her face unreadable. No, he is not dead. He escaped. Ethan exhaled. Great, so we just made him angry. Silara gave him a tired look. Welcome to my life, human. A sudden beeping from Ethan's communicator interrupted them. Sergeant Cole. Princess Silara. Report. Ethan clicked it on. We're alive. Barely. The artifacts destroyed. But the leader, Varkos, got away. A long pause. Then, understood. Get back to the command deck. This isn't over. Ethan sighed, looking at Silara. Guess we're not done yet. She sheathed her dagger. It would seem not. And together, they walked toward the next battle. A new understanding. After the battle, the ship's emergency sirens faded, leaving an eerie silence in the aftermath of the fight. Smoke still lingered in the air, the scent of burned circuits and plasma residue filling the massive storage bay. Sparks rained down from broken light fixtures, casting erratic shadows across the room. Ethan and Silara stood side by side, catching their breath. The containment field flickered, the system barely holding after the chaos. Varkos was gone. The artifact was destroyed, but somehow it didn't feel like a victory. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow, exhaling sharply. Well, that sucked. Silara didn't respond immediately. She was staring at the spot where Varkos had vanished, her silver eyes dark with thought. Ethan frowned. You all right? She turned to him, her expression unreadable. This was not just an attack, Ethan. It was a test. Ethan raised an eyebrow. A test? For what? She hesitated, then finally admitted. For war. A growing threat. Before Ethan could respond, his comlink crackled to life. Sergeant Cole, report back to the command deck immediately. It was Captain Reynolds. His voice sounded tense, more so than before. Ethan clicked on his communicator. We're on our way. Silara sheathed her dagger, her movements precise and deliberate. We must go. Ethan nodded, holstering his weapon. As they moved through the ruined storage bay, stepping over fallen debris and unconscious enemies, Ethan's mind kept turning over what Silara had said. A test for war. Varkos hadn't just been after the artifact. He had been testing their defenses, their weaknesses. He had wanted them to fight him, to see what they were capable of. And that meant he was planning something bigger. As they stepped into the emergency lift, ascending toward the command deck, Ethan stole a glance at Silara. She was deep in thought, her arms crossed, her expression far too calm for someone who had just fought a battle. She knows more than she's saying, and Ethan wasn't going to let it slide. Confrontation. The moment they stepped onto the command deck, they were met with tense, worried faces. Officers worked at their consoles, monitoring the damage reports and scanning for any remaining threats. Captain Reynolds stood near the center, arms crossed, his sharp gaze landing on Ethan and Silara as they entered. Good work down there, he said, though his tone was grim. But this situation just got worse. Ethan exhaled. Let me guess. Varkos didn't just disappear, did he? Reynolds nodded toward the main tactical screen, where a disturbing image flickered into view. A Valerian warship was hovering just outside Titan's Wrath's sensor range. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't responding. It was just watching. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Tell me that's not a coincidence. Silara stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. That ship is not from the Valerian High Command. It is a rogue vessel. Reynolds turned to her. Rogue? You're sure? She nodded. I recognize its design. It was decommissioned years ago, deemed too unstable for active service. Ethan folded his arms. And yet, here it is. Silara's jaw tightened. If Varkos was leading this operation, then this ship must belong to him. He has his own forces, his own army. Ethan let out a slow breath. So we're dealing with a rogue Valerian faction, armed with bio-enhanced soldiers, and possibly looking to start a war. Reynolds clenched his fists. We need to inform High Command. But Silara's voice was quiet when she spoke next. No. Reynolds and Ethan both turned to her, confused. What do you mean, no? Ethan asked. She met his gaze, her silver eyes unwavering. If we inform High Command, my father will declare this an internal matter. He will send his fleet to eliminate Varkos without considering the consequences. And if that happens, war with humanity will be inevitable. Ethan's stomach sank. Damn it. She was right. If the Valerian government handled this the wrong way, the fragile peace between Earth and Valeria would collapse. And Ethan had seen too many wars in his lifetime to let another one start. Reynolds rubbed his temples. So what do you suggest? Silara took a slow breath. We need to handle this discreetly. If Varkos is gathering an army, then we must dismantle it from the inside, before it becomes a threat to both our species. Ethan arched an eyebrow. And how do you propose we do that? Silara finally turned fully to face him. We go after him ourselves. The mission ahead. A silence fell over the command deck. Reynolds exhaled. That's a hell of a risk. Silara lifted her chin. It is the only way to prevent a war. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. So let me get this straight. You want us, just a handful of people, to take on an entire rogue Valerian force, infiltrate whatever operation Varkos is running, and stop him before he launches a full-scale war. Silara met his gaze. Yes. Ethan shook his head. Fantastic, because that sounds completely sane and not at all a suicide mission. But even as he spoke the words, he knew what his answer was. Because despite the danger, despite the risks, Ethan wasn't about to let an arrogant, power-hungry warlord decide the fate of humanity and Valeria. All right, princess, he finally said, smirking. Looks like you're stuck with me for a little while longer. Silara tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. But for the first time, there was a hint of something almost amused in her gaze. Try not to slow me down, human. Ethan chuckled. No promises. Epilogue. The war yet to come. As the rogue Valerian warship vanished into the void, a single encrypted message was transmitted from its command deck. Varkos stood at the center, his armor pulsing with raw energy, his expression unreadable as he watched the message send. A moment later, a reply came back. A simple phrase. Phase 1 is complete. Proceed to the next stage. Varkos smiled. The war hadn't been stopped. It had only just begun.